Okay. Thank you. So then, let's see. I toured the Royal Academy of Music and saw their organ department in particular. Kind of interesting, they only have 2 practice organs and 1 concert organ. And then they also have organ lessons at a church across the street. So, kind of interesting, Royal Academy of Music, but that was cool. I got to see Les Mis in the West End. This is the Royal Opera House. We saw Donizetti's The Elixir of Love. They did it in kind of a contemporary style, or more, it was like Oklahoma type feel. So that was fun. And this is the Changing of the Guard, the band playing at that. So lots of fun, diverse music there. Then lots of organ music too. So this is the only organ I really got to play. This is the organ at Temple Church, which is the organ that they used to record the Interstellar soundtrack.
Oh, I was wondering about that. That's cool.
Yeah. So really cool organ and cool space. This is Westminster Abbey, the organ. I got to observe a service from the organ loft. That's St. Paul's Cathedral. The organ's on either side here. Again, I got to observe a evensong from there too. This is the organ at Merton College in Oxford. While we were on the study abroad, we got split into groups and then we were assigned different colleges to sing evensong with the choir there. And so that's the college that I got to sing with. This is Trinity Chapel in Cambridge. This is the Methodist Central Hall, Westminster. Kind of looks, the room is similar to the tabernacle. It's kind of, they have like a balcony that goes up around and then a big, it's more circular, but it's kind of really similar.
Yeah, the layout.
Yeah. Then you have, this is King's College, Cambridge, and this is a place called St. John Smith Square.
Was the tabernacle organ, was that sort of designed after the one in Cambridge, or was it a different one that it was designed after?
No, it wasn't designed, like the organ wasn't designed after this organ. But I was just saying that
this one right there.
This one?
No, the one.
That one?
Yeah.
No.
No? Kind of looks like it.
If you want to see what the tabernacle organ is designed after, it's Boston, Methuen Music Hall in Boston.
Yeah.
Look that one up. It's like very
almost exactly. Yeah. It looks yeah. So these are just some of the organs. We went to lots of different churches too, and had lots of organ music and services. So now we'll get into the research I did. Like I said, my research was to observe and better understand the accompaniment techniques of British organists. The reason why I wanted to do this is because there's a huge repertoire of music in the Anglican tradition that was written for choir and organ. And there's still a rich tradition of performing it in churches today, even. And so it's performed regularly, there's lots of it. And then there's also this thing that I've called the British crescendo that British organists do, and I'll get into what that is and how they do that. But basically they just can create this seamless crescendo without even really noticing that it's happening, because they just do it so well. So then my method for my research was I interviewed 9 organists. I went to services and observed them while they played for the services. And then I also attended rehearsals and heard how the conductor worked with the organist. I did interview some conductors as well to get their opinion on what it's like working with organists and how they go about doing that. So it did focus mainly on church music, my research. I didn't really interview concert organists that accompany concert settings. But I figured the principles are pretty much the same. So these are the organists that I interviewed and where they're from. Just a kind of quick note. So some of you might know Ruth. She's from the U.S. and went and studied in Oxford and played at New College there. These 3 are directors of music at colleges in Cambridge, and so I interviewed all 3 of them. And then the other thing to note is that all of them are Anglican churches, except Brompton Oratory is a Catholic church in London, and then this is the Methodist Central Hall, which is a Methodist church. But all the rest are Anglican churches. Some of them are organists, most of them are organists, but these ones are the directors of music, and so at colleges they will be the ones conducting, and then the organ scholars will play the organ during services.
but they have played the organ and do know.
Yeah, all of them have played the organ and still play and will perform. A lot of them perform.
Okay.
Yeah, the other question.
How old is Ben Gore?
He's 25. Yeah, he was really interesting to talk to. He plays. So he's the organist at Brompton Oratory. He also plays for this school at Westminster Abbey, and they have like assembly services every morning, and so he'll play for those, and that's where I observed at the Westminster Abbey. But he's really talented organist. All of them are. I mean, they were all incredible to talk with and hear their stories. Just a little bit of a background on most of them, except probably Ruth and Sarah McDonald is from Canada, so this doesn't apply to her, but there's sort of a choral and organ tradition in the UK. So most of all these organists went through kind of this, all these stages in their life. They all started as choristers at cathedrals or churches in their own towns. And that's usually from the age of 8 till about 13, when their voice starts to change and they get kicked out of the choir. While they're choristers, they're required to take voice lessons and instrumental lessons, and usually they'll require them to take a keyboard instrument and another instrument. Most places, not all of them. But so a lot of them took voice lessons as boy choristers and then also took organ lessons. When they were kicked out of the choir, they continued to take organ lessons with the cathedral organist. Sometimes they would play, sometimes they would just observe and turn pages and take lessons. Then a lot of them were organ scholars at Cambridge or Oxford, and so they would play regularly there and work with directors of music. When they graduate there, and obviously this varies, but a lot of them will be organ scholars at a cathedral, say Westminster Abbey or St. Paul's Cathedral, or different cathedrals throughout the UK. And they'll be organ scholars, and then they'll just work at different churches being sub-organists is what they're called, because if it's kind of usually the case is the organist and choir master directs the choir, but they're generally called the organist and choir master, and then the sub-organist is the one who always will play for services. So they'll be sub-organists, and then a lot of times they'll go on to be the organist and choir master and then conduct the choirs. So you'll see a lot of the choir conductors that do have organ experience and have played organ since they were young, so they are able to work really well with the organists. I just put this up here just for fun. This is a list, Gramophone just kind of made a list of the top 20 choirs in the world, and I put in boxes all the ones that are from the UK. So 13 out of the 20 are from the UK as considered the top choirs in the world. Some of them are church choirs like Trinity College, Wells Cathedral. So kind of fun to see that there's this rich choral tradition. A lot of them is organs as they sing. So when I interviewed them, the organists, I got to know their background of the organ, and then I asked them a few questions. One of the things I asked them was, how does the rehearsal usually work? And how do you work with the conductor as the organist? They said usually, so the music is planned out in advance. If in a college, it's planned out for the whole term, which is like a semester basically, and so they'll have all the music planned out, and they'll know, okay, if there's 2 organ scholars, they'll know, okay, which ones is who playing for which one. And they'll just practice in advance. Same at most cathedrals, they'll have them a month or 2 in advance and know what they're going to play. And it's interesting too, most of the time the organ scholars, they'll be familiar with the repertoire because they've sung it as boy choristers when they were young. So they already kind of know the music, they just might not have played the organ accompanied the choir before. Usually the organist is responsible for just coming up prepared and having the registration set, and a lot of the times they don't run through with the conductor beforehand. They'll just show up at the rehearsal. Most church services, they have an hour or 45 minutes of rehearsal before the service, and then they just have the service, and that's about all the rehearsal that they have. And they'll sing at least probably 5 songs, probably 5 songs, and they'll accompany. So there's not a ton, so that's what I mean by saying that. The organist is responsible for just coming prepared, because there's not much time to be focusing on the conductor, to be focusing on the organist and what he or she can be doing better. Another thing is that, the next point that I have is that, especially if they've been at the church for a while, so sometimes if the organ scholar is new at the college, the conductor, what I found out is that they'll maybe take more time to work with them so they can get used to how each other works. But then after that, they just kind of let them take the reins on the organ registration and everything. I was at a service at Trinity College where the conductor is named Stephen Layton. It was interesting because he's an organist, and as the organist was playing, he was able to give him really specific comments. Like there were just these like kind of block chords that were just really quick, but he said hold not here. He also made comments about registration and things, and I think because there is just such limited rehearsal time, it helps to have the conductor that knows about the organ because they can be very to the point, specific, say what they want, how they want it done. So that was really, really interesting to see how they rehearse with the conductor and organist. The other thing that I asked was how they would characterize the English organ, the sound of it. Stephen Cleobury, who's the director of music at King's College, Cambridge, he told me this first point, that there's a distinction to be made about accompaniment organs and then performance or symphonic type of organs. And the thing is that a lot of the English organs, or especially ones in cathedrals and chapels, are built to be accompaniment instruments because they know that they're going to be used to accompany choirs, and therefore they usually won't be voiced super loud. You'll have wide-scale principals that are kind of a little more fluty of a sound, and lots of softer stops, soft reeds and soft strings to add lots of color during soft sections or pieces. And then another thing that a lot of them said is that they feel like the English organ sounds most like the human voice, very just a natural, organic sort of sound, which I agree with. When you listen to it and you're in a service, it does sound much like the voice. When the choir's singing and the organ's going, it kind of all just sounds like one. So that's how they characterize the English organ. Then I just asked tips on being a good accompanist in general, and the number one thing they said was to prepare the accompaniment more than your solo repertoire. Spend more time on the accompaniment, because if you mess up the accompaniment, it messes up everyone. But if you mess up your postlude or whatever, you can stumble through it and get back on it. It doesn't mess up the whole choir. So they all said be very prepared with your accompaniments. The next point that I have here is to get as much experience accompanying as possible, whether that's at the piano or the organ, and whether it's with the choir or soloists or chamber groups. Just get as much experience as you can accompanying, because that's a transferable skill, being able to work with the group or work with the conductor and just apply, and then you can apply those skills to organ playing. Pay attention to the text. Good organists will go through the text and see, and much like we do with hymns, you see, okay, what's the text saying? What registrations do I want to convey this text? That's something that you can do when you're accompanying at the organ as well. With the choir, you can think, okay, what's the text saying? How can I convey that through the registrations and dynamics? And then another thing is they said that they look at the vocal lines and where the singers breathe. And I think that ties back into the fact that a lot of them were choristers growing up, and so they do have a lot of vocal training as well. They know a lot of these things, and so you have to think like a singer or like a conductor and how the breaths will be treated, and time, if there's a breath that you need to stretch a little or add more time, just to be aware of those sorts of things. Lastly, I asked them about how they achieve the British crescendo. So first I need to explain what I mean by that. The British crescendo is what I call when they can go from a very soft dynamic level to really loud, and just a seamless transition. It can be over just a few measures or a few pages, but they're able to just kind of go from one to the next and louder until it just builds up to this great crescendo, and then the same thing with a decrescendo. And so that was kind of my main focus, is getting to the nitty-gritty of how they achieve that. So first, to kind of give you a demonstration, an example of what I mean by this, I wanted to listen to this piece, pay attention to the organ part, and what's written in, there's usually just dynamics. Occasionally it'll say like diapason or couple to swell, a few markings for the organist, but usually dynamics, it's just your standard dynamic. So we'll go ahead and listen to this. So could you guys hear the crescendos and decrescendos in that? How do you, I'm just curious, how do you think they achieved those? Yeah.
Well, I know one of them, like what they said is that they did accompany, the swell they would use. They'd use super couplers, or they would use 4-foot stops, and then they would use two-foot stops. But like what you were saying earlier, how they're very light reeds. I heard the reedy sound, but it didn't overpower the choir. It more supported them than just going above and beyond. Where you think, we'll drown out the choir, but that's not the purpose of it. Which was really, really interesting, just hearing how they even blend. Like even this last part, those things which are above, and how the pedal is going in there. It's as if they have that really low bass, and it's really, really cool seeing how they blend.
Yeah.
I might be totally wrong, but I think I remember this from the registration classes. Don't they have a lot of presets that they use that each add stops gradually?
Yeah.
And so they're able to add and subtract. Like on that one crescendo, you like when you pay attention, you can hear them adding and taking away stops, but in a very gradual way, which makes it very seamless. And so I think that's the big thing, is especially if it's on presets, it's so close at hand, you can do it so fast.
Yeah.
And if you have enough presets, you can do it so in such small amounts that your crescendo can be quite expressive, and you can have quite a range of motion there.
Yeah, we also use a lot of the expression pedal. I noticed with the swell, they say open the swell box, close it, which adds even more color. That you can't have all those, all that sound there, and then all you do is you open up the swell box, and there you have that sound coming in.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, what they do is kind of a combination of the two. They do a lot of with presets and with the expression pedals. But the thing with the presets is interesting, and I'll get to it in a little bit. They don't really use the general pistons; they just use divisional pistons.
Oh, interesting.
So I'll get into what they do with that in a little bit. I think I also wanted to point out that there's sometimes where, if you think about it, there's two different types of registrations. There's like blocks, so it suddenly changes, a sudden change of registration. That's different than what I'm talking about, like the gradual crescendo. So, for example, like here at the bottom of this page, there was a sudden change because the choir just got to the piano, but then there was a sudden registration change. So that's different than kind of just a gradual crescendo from here up to here, So this is more what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the British crescendos, that gradual crescendo over a few measures or a page or two. Yeah.
Was the French that had a system where it was like a very set, then you had this, and open the box, and then you had this, and they went through and had a very systematic when you add things.
Well, they do that here too. There's it's really systematic with this too. I'm not sure about the French and their tradition. But this one, it is very systematic, and I'll show you that in just a second here. I also wanted to point out just the music that applies this sort of British crescendo. I just wanted to show you, it's kind of starting with this time period, and especially these two, Perry and Stanford. A lot of their music, organists, they perform it all the time in the churches, and the organists will use this sort of technique. The reason for that is because these ones before, these are mainly Baroque or Renaissance composers, and so the organs weren't as big back then, and so when you perform it, you don't have all these registration changes and expression pedals. And then some of these also apply it, but as you get to the later ones, a lot of times they'll have very specific registrations, and they'll say what stops to use and when. But for the most part, these two, and then some of these, and there's of course lots of other composers in this era that when they're performing their works, they'll use this technique.
Ooh, Matthias, any relation?
My uncle.
Are you being real?
No. But I found out a long time ago that people like it a lot better when I say that. If I say no, he's not related, they just go, oh. If I say he's my uncle, they go, really? And then so I go with that. I like his music very much.
I wonder why.
Okay, so this is sort of the nitty-gritty of how they achieve it. So it's kind of simple, but it's also really complex. So first, what they do is they take each division, they'll set up a preset in the divisional pistons from 1 to 8 of just a gradual crescendo. And so just 1 being the softest, 8 being the loudest. And like I say here, they don't use the general pistons in their choir accompaniment in this style. So again, if it's something where it's more specific or sudden registration changes, then they'll probably use the general pistons. But for the most part, they're using the divisional pistons. Next is when they are changing divisional pistons on the swell, they'll always have the swell box closed. So if they know that, okay, I'm going to be crescendoing and I'm going to be going from 2 to 3 on the swell, they'll start to close the box, then they'll change to preset number 3 on the swell, and then they'll gradually open the box again. Then the opposite is true of the grate. So when they're going to add stops to the grate, they'll have the swell box all the way open when they add or take away stops on the grate. The reasoning behind this, a couple organists explained to me, is to kind of cover the bumps, is what they would say. So when you're adding on the swell, you want to have the box closed so you won't really hear when something's added.
Yeah, if they're at a 4 flute, it's not just going to jump at you.
It won't just be this sudden,
it'll seem like it's coming out of...
They'll add it and you won't even know, and then they'll gradually open the box, and it's kind of this gradual
it joins in.
that adds it in. And then if you think about the grate, they'll have the swell box completely open so that the sound of the swell will overpower whatever's being added on the grate.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. So it's very systematic in a way, but it's really hard to do. So another thing that I want to point out is they have this coupler called a grate and pedal piston coupler. So what it does is, and they all told me that you'll go sit at any English organ and that coupler will always be pulled or turned on. What it does is if you push a preset on a general piston, it will also be as if you're pushing that same preset for the pedal. So that way, as you're building up, the pedal is also being matching the balance. You know?
So it's for the grade. So if you say, oh great, let's go to preset 2, the pedal will
the
reflect
pedal
that.
preset 2 will, like this, at the same time you push grade preset 2, it'll be as if you pushed the pedal preset 2 as
At
well.
the same time.
At the same time. And vice versa, you can push the pedal preset 2, and it'll be as if you push the grade preset 2. Now some organs do have them separate to where it only will couple, say you push the grade preset 2 and then it'll couple the pedal, but if you push the pedal it wouldn't couple the grade. Like they're two separate ones, but most of them it's just one and the same. Yeah.
So it's like a semi-general.
In a way, yeah, it almost creates the grade as like a general piston
Like
in
it
a sense.
excludes the swell. 'Cause,
Yeah, it just
all the
excludes
cool
the
kids
swell
are-
or
The swell under it.
yeah.
Do most of these organs have just 2 manuals, or are they 3?
No, I mean some of them. So I mean it varies like you would see here, but a lot of the bigger ones are 3 or 4, you know. Let me see. Oh, the other thing is this bottom one that a lot of times they don't have a registrational assistant, so they're just doing all of this changing while they're playing and turning pages. So they just have phenomenal console management. And I have a couple videos that I wanted to show you of 2 organists that did this for me. But yeah.
Another question for you, Ron. So if you have a long string of 1 to 8 presets set and you're going back and forth between swell and gray as you bump it up, so then once you have the box open and you change the grade piston, then how do you get it? Do you just close it back down to get to this, so you can add a swell piston?
Yeah, so I think then I'm gonna go on to the next slide because this might answer it, I think.
Okay.
This is from when I interviewed Simon Johnson, the organist at St. Paul's Cathedral. I felt like he explained it the best. And I'll read it because it's kind of important to get the right emphasis, so hopefully I'll read it right. So it said, on an English organ, we'll set up the divisional pistons in a crescendo, so 1 is quiet and 8 is loud. You'll start quite soft on, say, swell 1 and grade 1, and you might then close the swell box and go up to swell 2 while the swell box is closed, and then you would open the swell box and maybe hit grade piston 2 whilst the swell box is open. And I love that word, whilst, it's very British. And then you would close the swell box again and hit swell piston 3, and then open again and hit grade piston 3, and so on. So the swell box is at maximum volume within its piston when you hit the grade piston. What that means is that you're basically covering all the bumps effectively. Sometimes you might go from swell 2 to swell 4, but as long as the box is closed and it's a good box, which they generally are in this country, you are barely aware that you've added to the swell until you have opened the box, which you can do as gradually as you'd like. And then by the time you have opened the box, the swell is much louder than the grate, and you can add to the grate and cover it. You do a similar thing in reverse when you do a decrescendo. So does that answer your question,
Yeah.
or does that make sense?
So does
Yeah.
I mean, do you get any effect of you add some and then you lose it again when you close the swell box, or can you not?
Oh, I
lose
see what
that?
you're saying. I don't think so. And I think it, one thing that, so what you're saying is that when you're gonna go to add more on the swell and you're going to close the swell box, does it seem like it gets
Does
quieter?
it lose something for a second?
Yeah,
and then-
I don't think so, honestly.
Or is it just fast enough and subtle enough?
It's
that
pretty,
fine?
yeah, they do it pretty fast, yeah, like fast and subtly, and plus the idea of covering the bumps, like the grate will be covering that sort of the loss of the swell.
Oh, that's true.
So you don't really notice that like the swell box is being closed, but then you notice it as it's opening, and then there's like more sound coming out. Yeah.
So like on these swell boxes, on some swell boxes you can kind of hear them like open and close, but for the general, from what you observed, were they pretty quiet when they were in motion?
Yeah, I never heard them.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, not like the Manson.
Yeah. No, I never heard them. I was going to point out too, this idea of the British crescendo, I feel like is very, again, it models the voice and singing, where you'll have phrases where it just crescendos and decrescendos very naturally. And it also is similar to what you can do at the piano, where you can just, by playing harder or softer, you get louder or quieter. So in a way, they've been able to achieve that sort of thing on the organ by doing this. So now I wanted to show you two videos. This first one is one of the organist at Temple Church. I can't remember his name right now. He just improvised this for me, and I asked him if I could record it. So watch the use of the crescendo pedal and the pistons and everything that he does. He also pulls some stops too. He's just improvising, but it's really interesting. So. Yeah, so were you able to see some of those things?
Yeah.
Like what did you see that you did?
Well, everything that you said earlier, but it's interesting to see how well thought out those pistons are. Like it's not like one to the other, and then it's like a big hiccup. You know, like it's very, very, very smooth. Like what you were saying, like I was assuming that like this, it just really, really works. And I see how there's that relation with the human voice as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There was one point, I don't know if you noticed, as he was doing the decrescendo where the swell box was closed and he just pushed a bunch of the swell going down at once, like.
Yeah, and you couldn't notice.
Yeah, and you know, and some of them on this video, it's kind of, we know it's coming because we see him pushing the pistons, and so we can hear it. But I bet if we were, if we were just sitting, and if we weren't right next to the organ, if we were just down, sitting and listening, we wouldn't notice a lot of them, honestly. And so, I just think it's really cool. The next video that I have is one of the director of music at Jesus College. And he's playing a piece, it's an organ piece, so it's not a required piece, by Hubert Perry. But he does some of the same stuff. Yeah.
Quick question. Do they have general presets?
They do,
Okay,
yeah.
cool.
Yeah. But they just don't really use them when they're doing this, which is interesting. One of them, I'll just mention this. So the lady that I pointed out that she was from Canada, she grew up, being taught like, oh, set the general piston, like if it's, put it in a convenient place. But when she went to the UK, that no one did that. Like, it's just not a thing there. So kind of interesting. Okay, so this one is, again, this one. again, I mean, wow. Every measure he was pushing pistons or changing, opening, closing the swell. He probably had his foot on the expression pedal most of the time.
Yeah.
Anything stick out to you that time watching that one? I mean, again, we saw this time when he was decrescendoing, he did it with the pedal piston, the feet piston, whatever. Toe studs were pushed a bunch going down all at once.
Yeah. I feel like it's just this intense familiarity with the organ console that you're working with, that whatever organ it is, you've done so much on it, that you know exactly where every single stop is, that you don't really have to think about it. I just need to add an extra sound, I pull this stop here, I need to take this out, I know I'll go here, I don't even care what it is, I just know what I'm doing to get exactly what I want.
That's true.
Yeah. Yeah, they're very, very familiar with the console. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just gonna say it kind of gives the organ a different character as being very expressive and much more flexible than
Yeah.
you might often think.
Yeah, I agree. And that struck me too, like listening to him and stuff, that they're able to make it very like fluid and expressive in a way that maybe we aren't used to when we were playing our repertoire. Any other observations? Yeah.
Even more so, like I was closing my eyes for a sec and just listening, like I could hear the buttons being changed and stuff like that. I didn't know, like, you know, I started having an idea which manual, which one, or this or that. But to me, it seemed much more like an orchestra, like that he, that he was perfectly in control of, and that's really interesting. One of the things that I loved, that I love about the organ, besides the piano you can do so much. The organ, you have the sounds that you have the creativity of the piano. You have more sounds than the piano, but you have that creative aspect. You can add, take away, and it's interesting seeing how they take this and they bring it, to the nth degree, where they really are adding and taking away as if, they really were, instruments coming in and out and whatnot. It's really cool when we think of, it's just, this and this and that. It's really, really interesting.
And I agree with you. I think of like an orchestra where they can swell at certain sections and instruments are added, and
very much so.
It's similar here. And so I was just thinking, I mean, we can try and do this with a lot of the repertoire we play too, or even for choir accompaniments, if you're playing like Knappelberg, that a lot of times will apply. Just think of it as more of an orchestra that you're playing rather than just the organ. Just to wrap up here. Yeah. So just in general, these are my last thoughts of what makes them great at Accompaniment. First of all, their preparation. They're very, very prepared when it comes to playing for services, especially their accompaniments. Understanding of the text and vocal lines, they also thought was important. They have lots of opportunities to accompany at the organ, and so if there's anything to learn from that, just take as much opportunity to accompany as possible, and especially if you have opportunities to accompany at the organ. And then, of course, their use of the pistons and expression pedals and just their management of the organ console is very, very accomplished and phenomenal at it. And then before I finish, I have one more slide I just wanted to kind of add a word about organ grants, just so you guys can know, in case you've ever thought of doing an organ grant. I highly recommend it because you get $1,500. I mean, that's a lot of money to help pay for school, pay for grants, any of that stuff. You get to do meaningful research that you want to do, which is really fun. I mean, maybe for some of you it wouldn't be fun. But, you have to put in time and stuff. But honestly, I found it very, very fulfilling to be able to do this research and something that I was passionate about and I wanted to do. You get to meet professionals in your field a lot of the time. I guess not with every project, but I was able to meet some of these world-class organists and talk with them, and they were really nice people, nice to work with, and so you get to meet awesome people. You get to say that you were a recipient of a research grant, which looks really good, and then also you can have an opportunity to present or publish your research, which also is really good for resumes and stuff. So just a thought, if any of you ever are thinking about it or have questions, you can always talk with me and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you have about it. But do any of you have any last questions or anything, last comments in general? Yeah, did you?
Yeah, so most of these organists spend their time on like one or two organs that they know really well.
Yeah.
rather than traveling all over the place to do different things.
Well, a lot of them. So some at the bigger cathedrals, they also are concert. They'll play a series of concerts, like they'll tour Europe
Yeah.
or America. They'll do concerts as well. But I mean, of
But
course,
the
they're very
repertoire
familiar-
is going to be completely different.
What was that?
The repertoire will be completely different than having
What
to
do you-
require like one of these crescendos and things like that.
Yeah. So I mean, a lot of them, yeah, they are very familiar with the organs that they're playing because a lot of them have been there for a long time. And then there's such professionals too that when they go to a new console, they're able to look at it and just kind of know
Yeah.
by looking and just quickly assessing, like, okay, what's where, and you know, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine it would also help because, like, if most of the big organs where they've been playing it have similar setups, and
Mhm.
I'm sure they don't even have to change anything.
Yeah, and
I'm
that's
sure
what some of them
it's
said.
pretty much all the same.
Yeah, you can. A lot of them
Really
say you
nice.
can just sit down at an English organ and at almost any cathedral or church, and it'll have that similar setup.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, slightly different sound, but generally.
Yeah,
the
the
same.
sounds will be different. Pistons might be different places, but they'll all have that sort of crescendo already preset. Did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, so I mean, you mentioned setting up these pistons in order. What did you observe as far as
What that order
the
is.
order in which they add things?
I didn't observe too much of that, and I did read an article though, and Ruth told me a little bit about it too. A lot of times they'll start with like a flute and then add a string, and then sometimes they'll add like the 4-foot flute before they'll add the 8-foot principal, and then as they're building up and get to where they have maybe 8-4-2, then they'll add a reed before they add the mixtures. And also, Stephen Cleobury at King's College, he said that a lot of times you don't use mixtures or mutations when accompanying the choir, or at least he doesn't. So that's about all I can say about that, because I don't know too much more about it.
So do they think in terms, or from what you've observed, do they think in terms of like soft to loud, or kind of like mellow to bright? Or is it kind of one and
I
same?
think, I think it's kind of both, really. Yeah, because you do have to consider both of them when you're trying to build up this crescendo, you know. So I think they'll kind of just take both into consideration. Any other questions? Well, thank you guys for coming.
So on the note of the Orca grant thing, they take proposals for Orca grants once a year. The deadline is the end of October, it's like 26th or something. Notice that he combined his Orca research with a study abroad and used that to fund the study abroad. Getting any ideas? Okay.
No idea.
So, I mean, they're obviously not going to award, 15 Orca grants, all for people to go study organs in France. But, if you want to do something like that, it's worth a try. If you want to get awarded one of these, you have to put some serious effort into formalizing an idea of what it is you want this research project to be, because there has to be something that comes out of it. It's not just so that you can go and learn about things. You have to produce something, whether it's a presentation or a paper or something like that. So how did you fulfill that?
So I went to. They have workshops that you can go to now. I think if you look into it, where they tell you how to do it. You're just required to. Yeah, you're required to have something come out of it, and usually that's just a paper that you'll submit to the Orca office before. I think if you get awarded it this next year, it's due by the end of the following year. So like mine is, I have to submit it by the end of this year, December. So you're not necessarily required to present it like I am, or to go take it to a conference or convention and present it. But yeah, you just have to. It has to be something that adds to scholarship of the field that you're wanting to do this research in. And so it doesn't help, or it doesn't hurt to just go to a workshop and see what they say. The one I went to, they even said there was a faculty member that he led a study abroad to New Zealand, and a few of the students together did like an Orca grant. You can't have more than one person on an Orca grant. You split the money, or you can all do separate but related type of research, and each do an individual archive of the research.
So basically, you have to present the idea to them. They'll say, okay, we're funding research.
Yeah, so
And then
you'll
in the end, you say, okay, this is what I have done with the funds that you've given me, basically.
yeah, basically. And so what you'll do is you'll write out like what your proposed research is, why you feel that this is something that needs to be researched, and then how you're going to do it, and yeah, and then in the end you write up about the outcome of your research.
And I got in talking with the office, asking about like how it is awarded.
Yeah.
And it's not across the whole school. You're not competing with a bunch of accounting majors
Yeah.
or business majors for their own research. It goes within each separate school.
Right.
And so you
Yeah,
will
that's
be
a good
compared
point.
with other applications from the school to use it for your program.
Yeah. And like I said, mine was where I went and interviewed people, but you don't have to do something like that. You can do research. You can research a specific organ in France or a specific like clavicle. You know, it can be anything really.
So if you're interested in doing something like this, the time to start thinking about it is right now. Because it really does take some time and several drafts to get a proposal that is really compelling. They're not going to give away money here for someone who just shows up and, turns in something that they just kind of came up with at midnight the night before. You have to show how the money is going to be used. You have to show how your project is going to contribute to what's out there. And so, you've got about a month here. And so, if you want to do this to try and help fund some of your organ tour to France, your organ music tour to France, start thinking about it right now. You have to have a full-time faculty member who is kind of in line to be your mentor for this. And so I can't do it. It has to be Dr. Cook. But if it's something that you want to do, just get the ball rolling right now and check the Oracle website to kind of get all the information you need. Anything else?
That was great.
So we're done. Have a good night, everyone.
Keep practicing.
I know. Maybe you said this in a sentence that I wasn't thinking, but where did we find out about financial aid for?
No,
We're going to try and get that settled right now. Probably.
Okay.
Mine was like,
Yes.
you have to go through a
Just informed
special,
us
like once you're
that we
awarded,
got the registration thing up and running. And so we've got we may even just push the deadline back another week or something just to give us a little more time to get this settled. But